it is. Hello, good morning. I know when John asked how many of y'all worry about getting stung and nobody raised their hand, so I thought, well, my work is done, I can go home. They did ask me, so last time I spoke here, I talked about creating pollinator gardens. And I do travel around the state and the southern region teaching that. But today they asked me to talk about bees and just kind of people's fear of bees. So that's what I'm going to focus on. Can y'all hear me okay? Not too loud? So I first started doing pollinator gardens about 12 years ago. And really the phrase pollinator garden wasn't really out there. But as y'all are probably aware, it's a very hot topic now nationally. So tremendous interest. And I can tell you that personally, it could be a full-time job for me, just working with pollinator gardens. But actually, I work with farmers. That's my primary job. And so that's how I got pulled into this. I work with both farmers and beekeepers. And of course, I don't have to tell y'all that farmers require pollinators to, for their crops to produce fruits. And of course, beekeepers that are managing honeybees, they need something to forage on. So that was a good place for me. And I knew we didn't have a lot of information in North Carolina on what are good pollinator plants. So that's how I got pulled into this 12 years ago and started researching what are the appropriate plants for our region and developing a photo database. I'm a photographer, so my intent all along was to create a web-based resource, very photocentric, and that's how I got pulled into it. So I thought I'd start out just giving y'all a little virtual tour of one of the pollinator gardens I created in Pittsboro. It is open to the public, 365 days a year, so anyone can visit it. And I do want to mention, just so I don't forget, I brought y'all a handout that I think we're going to give to you on the way out that has my top 25 native pollinator plants. And it's got contact information for me and my websites and my social media. But this garden I created in Pittsboro, in a public space. It's actually private property, but it's open to the public. This garden particularly went in 10 years ago, but I had created other ones before that. So it's in its 10th year, and it's grown over time. And right now, it's got over 210 unique species in the garden, and 85% of them are native to North Carolina. That was really important to me. Native plants provide a lot more benefits to wildlife, so that's important. And I have a small group of volunteers that helps me manage it, and we do it all organically. I do tours for the public. All that information's on my website. I'm actually doing a tour next Wednesday at 5 o'clock. The last 2 public tours of the year, but I do the tours May through October. So I'm just going to show y'all, some pictures from the garden. Most of these are on my website or Facebook page. You can kind of get a glimpse of it. This is an urban garden. It's at a property that has it's actually an old label factory. But it's got a farmer's market, it's got a restaurant, it's got a co-op grocery store, it's got a dance studio. So it's just got lots of things happening there. And the other neat thing I'd like to mention to y'all that was a little bit unexpected, when I chose this site to do my demonstration garden, there was only one business there. And so over the course of time, as I developed these gardens, it's really added value to the property, as any pretty perennial garden would, and has actually helped him attract tenants. And by the way, I took about 95% of the photos in this presentation are all taken in that garden. So that not just this part, but the rest of the presentation. So again, it's got these beds spread out over the property, throughout the parking lot and the lawn. That's actually a bike rack, that apple. So we get all kinds of neat insects. I like this one. Every time I see this picture, I'm like, can't we all get along? What's that? Rodney King said that, remember? So, the bees will forage together on the same flower, different species. But the idea, of course, with the pollinator garden is that you have things blooming from early spring to late fall, an overlapping bloom period. And we're not here to talk about the details of how to do a pollinator garden today. But again, I do workshops on that. But as John mentioned, I like seeing his presentation. I'm the kid that had pet snakes, growing up. I love all the critters. I'm always just so tickled to see the reptiles and amphibians and spiders and birds. And so a pollinator garden attracts a lot more, of course, than just pollinators. We have about 176 species of butterflies in North Carolina, so I love learning them myself. This is the eastern tail blue, one of our tiny little butterflies on one of our tiny little flowers, which is, again, kind of giving you an overview. The garden looks different every month. Spring's a nice time. Usually in North Carolina, the summer is what we would call the dearth period of bloom, but it doesn't have to be. I think in the summer I average about 60 different species in bloom. So that's, again, trying to show people that you don't have to have a lack of blooms. This is one of our hummingbird moths, a day-flying clear-wing moth. A lot of people mistake for a hummingbird. Carpenter bees, everybody loves to hate. They're actually excellent pollinators. So I like to talk about that when I'm working with people. There's our little buddy again, and a lot of these insects, they will actually eat some of the pollinators, including the bats that come at night. I'm cool with that because bats provide a lot of ecosystem services for our farms. Even though they may be getting some of my pollinators, they're also, of course, controlling a lot of the moths that turn into caterpillar pests. Leafcutter bees, this is on a button bush. Notice all the yellow pollen on the underside of the abdomen on the scopy or the branched hairs that bees have to carry pollen. So fall shot, I like to use grasses, not just flowering things, but also native grasses, which is great habitat for cavity nesting bees like bumblebees, but also just general wildlife shelter. John had a picture of the cardinal flower. We love the cardinal flower. It's great for hummingbirds, also great for the big-bodied bumblebees that can just kind of muscle their way in there. Again, one of our smaller gray hair streak butterflies on ironweed. There's that sunflower bee with a yellow pollen on an ironweed bloom. We love the caterpillars, as an extension agent. Things are changing, but we always get calls about caterpillars are eating my plants. I want to kill them. That's terrible. I'm like, I plant things so the caterpillars will come eat them, and you're trying to do a little shift, a little mind shift and help people understand. Of course, this is a black swallowtail caterpillar. This is one of its native hosts, golden Alexander or Zizia aurea, and they're quite little eating machines. Another spring shot with a wood mint, a downy wood mint, and the butterfly weed, one of the milkweeds that John was talking about. Spring is just gorgeous with indigo and golden Alexander. I love the butterflies. It's an American lady. So this is one of the parking lot islands. Again, it's a very urban garden. It can be quite challenging with parking lot, asphalt, and sidewalk, radiating heat, snow plows, pushing snow and banking snow, and crushing your shrubs. Just interesting stuff happens in a public garden. This is one of my favorite native vines called spurred butterfly pea. I use it as a ground cover, and it's a very mellow ground cover. It kind of rambles over other plants, and the bumblebees love it. There's a wasp. I think paper wasp don't trigger anybody here, but there's a paper wasp I think are gorgeous, and we're going to talk a little bit more about them a little bit later. Some of our bees are just gorgeous, metallic, iridescent little jewels flying around. This is a terribly named sweat bee. Doesn't that just sound like that sweat bee couldn't possibly be beautiful and sounds very annoying, but they can be very beautiful, lots of different species. So, more Lytris, spring. I love this bed in the spring with the Culver's root and the coneflowers. So you can see pollinator gardens can be very lovely. In the fall, you can get some of your native grasses and blooming, and some of the others, more butterflies. Fall, so one of the things I do for the pollinators is, so I have goldenrod, but I have like 12 species of goldenrod. So my goldenrod will start blooming in July and go all the way through November in some cases, really lengthening the bloom period. Another nice fall shot. You can have some great fall color on some of these perennials. So great, pollinator gardens, most people have heard about them. They know it's a national movement. What exactly is a pollinator garden? What are you trying to do with a pollinator garden? So the whole idea, of course, is to provide habitat. And by habitat, I'm talking about not only forage, the plants, the flowers, but also nesting sites for bees. So for the pollinators and bees and other pollinators. So what are pollinators and why do we need them? So probably most of y'all are aware that much of the food we eat, usually you'll hear said about a third, every 3 bites of food that we eat rely on pollinators. Would we starve to death without pollinators? Not really, because a lot of our grains are, wind pollinated, but we would have a very boring diet because a lot of our favorite foods, the really flavorful vegetables and fruits that are full of flavor and nutrients, those are the ones that are relying on pollinators. I mean, some people do think they would die without coffee and chocolate, and those rely on pollinators, so I guess it kind of depends on your perspective, right? But it's not only food, but it's also fiber. It's even dairy and meat. Think about it, because to produce meat and dairy, livestock need to be able to forage on things like alfalfa. Guess what? Alfalfa is pollinated by bees. Some of the medicines, some of the drinks, and some of the fiber crops rely on pollinators. So they are a very important part of our life, whether you realize it or not. And so most of the pollinators are insects, over 200,000 species, many different types of insects, not just the obvious bees and butterflies, but also bugs and beetles and flies even. Those can all be our pollinators. So just kind of give you just a little cast of characters of some of our pollinators. We have about 17 species of just bumblebees in North Carolina. So lots of different, about 48 species in the country, 17 species found in North Carolina. Notice the tongue on that bumblebee. So the length of the tongue of the pollinator can dictate, what kind of flowers are able to access. You have some short-tongued pollinators and some long-tongued pollinators. Another one of our smaller butterflies, a red-banded hairstreak. So lots of diversity among butterflies. Oh, there's another wasp. So the great black wasp, this is on a cover crop of buckwheat. So they're good predators in the garden. Bumblebee. So what is that blob, orange blob on her leg? Pollen. What is the pollen used for? Anybody? I can't hear. That's right. So pollen is protein, and it's taken back to the nest to feed the baby bees, the larvae. So here's one of our native milkweed species that is not really that commonly known, Asclepias rubra, which is the red milkweed. So that bee is collecting both pollen and nectar from that plant. This is one of our really fun butterflies. You can see why it's called a snout butterfly. It's got these exaggerated palps, and they actually are leaf mimics. So if they feel endangered or threatened by a bird or some other predator, they'll actually hang upside down from a leaf, and that snout will kind of look like the pedicel of the leaf. And of course, they'll be camouflaging that bright orange underwing. So they'll just really blend in and look like a dried leaf. But the funny story about these butterflies is, for whatever reason, they're very friendly. They don't mind people. I'll often find them landing on my camera or my shoulder or my hat, and they'll just ride around with me for about 10 minutes. And other butterflies I know, are very wary. Like the minute I approach a plant, they're off. They're out of there. So it just depends on the species. Some seem to be more wary of people than others. More wasp. We've got some multitasking wasp here. And here's one of the plants that John mentioned, one of the mountain mint. So that's a really great plant for attracting an amazing diversity of insects. But isn't that a beautiful wasp? Does anybody agree with me? Can wasps be beautiful? Thank you. All right, very good. Okay, glad to see that. Another hummingbird moth, very long proboscis, again, long tongue for reaching into that flower. And I think some people mistake them for bumblebees. They're different species, so they have different sizes. I think they also look like little lobsters. Their little tails look like little lobsters. But here's caterpillars again. This is our second largest caterpillar in North Carolina. I've had kids tell me it looks like it has little lady beetles attached to it. I think they're beautiful. So this is the caterpillar of the silk moth. Does anybody know what our largest caterpillar is in North Carolina? Yeah, there we go. Hickory horned devil, which when fully the fully grown caterpillar is the size of a hot dog. It's quite large. I know. Pretty remarkable. Um, but you don't eat them like a hot dog. So, and it's got these appendages that make it look kind of scary. It's not poisonous. It's not stinging either. It just looks scary to help it ward off predators that would come after. But that is a fierce-looking critter there. I think they're gorgeous. I love seeing them. And this is the adult, hickory horn, the regal moth. Yeah, so that's the adult moth. Isn't that beautiful? Do y'all remember how many species of butterflies I said we had? About 176. Guess how many moth species we have? 2,700 in North Carolina. Yeah. So we'll spend many lifetimes trying to learn all the moths in North Carolina. Here's our honeybee. Got those fully loaded pollen baskets. I had another kid. Kids come up with great stuff. Y'all know that, right? So I had a kid say it looks like she's tooting her horn. I think she is. She's celebrating because she's going in to feed on that Carolina silverbell. So I mentioned that flies can be pollinators. So syrphid flies are also called flower flies or hover flies. And in this case, this species is actually dwarfing a little sweat bee. Many of these syrphid flies are bee and wasp mimics, so people will mistake them for hornets or bees. Of course, flies, unlike bees, flies have 2 wings, not 4. They have very stubby antennae, and they have these large compound eyes. And syrphid flies also, they're pollinators as adults, but their larval stage is an aphid predator. So they really help control a lot of our aphids. So this fly will actually lay eggs on leaves that have aphids, and when the eggs hatch, they eat the aphids, which is pretty cool. They're also quite loud. They're like little B-52 bombers. You can hear them, coming in, flying. But look at the diversity, because these are also syrphid flies of different species, much smaller, feeding on the pollen of the spiderwort. We could have beetles that are pollinators. So soldier beetles are similar to lady beetles, and then they're predaceous, and they'll feed on insect eggs, small caterpillars, things like that. And their larvae actually also feed in the soil and help control grasshopper eggs, but they'll also consume pollen. Bugs, a lot of the bugs, like this ambush bug, will lie in wait in flowers, and in many cases perfectly camouflaged, as this one is. So they have these grasping forelegs similar to a praying mantis, and they may grab, John had showed that picture of a crab spider. Same thing, they'll just lie in wait on a bloom and wait to grab something when it comes by. They're not important pollinators, of course, but they will hang out on flowers. I love the leafcutter bees in the spring. Again, the scopy or the branched hairs on the underside. So not all bees have those pollen baskets on their back legs where they carry the pollen. A lot of our native bees don't have those, and they carry the pollen on the branched hairs at different parts of their body. In the case of the leafcutter bee, these hairs are concentrated on the abdomen, and when they're fully covered, and they can look like flying Cheetos, they get quite covered in pollen. But real important pollinators, the leafcutter bees for, somebody must be hungry, thinking about Cheetos now. Real important pollinators for our early blooming things, like fruit trees and things in the spring. Of course, you want to have host plants for butterflies when you do a pollinator garden, so you're looking for, caterpillars. Can anybody see any other insects in this picture besides the caterpillars? Yeah, good eyes. We've got some praying mantis nymphs here. Yep, very small, very small. Okay. Beetles, things like the scarab beetle on Piedmont barber's buttons. But then, so those are kind of an overview of the different types or orders of insects that can be considered pollinators. We also have some vertebrates, of course, that can be pollinators, like the hummingbird, also rodents and bats. Now, in North Carolina, we have 16 species of bats, but our bats, what do they eat? We already talked about that. They eat insects, right? So they are not nectar-feeding bats, which means they're not considered pollinators here. But in the American Southwest and the Costa Rica and the tropical parts of the world, you have pollinating or nectivorous bats. But bats, even though they don't pollinate here, they're a very important role in helping with pest control. But if anybody's ever enjoyed a margarita, then you should be thanking bats for that, because tequila is made from the plant Agave tequiliana plant, and the Mexican long-nosed bat does pollinate that plant. So shout out to the Mexican long-nosed bat for the margarita, right? So, even if you don't have a garden, you're not a farmer, we all like to eat, so we all rely on bees. And by far, they are the most important pollinators. So a small percentage of plants can only be pollinated through buzz pollination because they have specialized poricidal anthers, which means the pollen is in a tube and is not readily available for anybody just to grab. So an example would be solanaceous plants, which is eggplant, tomato, pepper. So this and a lot of like honeybees, for example, are not able to buzz pollinate. They're incapable of doing it. So the bees that do it, like this bumblebee, what they do is they grab with their jaws, their mandibles, they grab the anthers with their jaws, and they vibrate their flight muscles at such a frequency that it causes the pollen to be expelled. And you can actually go on YouTube and Google this, and you can use a tuning fork to cause this phenomenon, because it has the same frequency as the vibrating muscles of the bumblebee. And you'll see little videos of pollen streaming out, of these poricidal anthers with somebody with a tuning fork next to it, which is, I'm determined to get a video of that one day myself. But it's really fun, and you can hear it. I'm a little nervous. John had his sounds, and he did a very good job. But you can hear the difference when we've all heard bees buzzing, right? So when bees are sonicating, another word for buzz pollinating, you'll hear a difference in their frequency. So they'll be at the flower, those. It's a higher pitch, and you can actually see them doing that. So again, real important. And greenhouse tomato growers that grow, we have many of them in my county. You've got them probably in your county. Because they're inside, they are actually putting in domesticated bumblebee hives in the greenhouse to pollinate those tomatoes for this very reason. Then you have squash bees. It looks a lot like a honeybee. It's not. So these are very specialized bees that only feed on squash plants. And the male bees will actually often spend the night in the flower. So they're real important for pollinating squash plants. You have southeastern blueberry bee, which is a very important pollinator of our blueberry crops. It's not the only pollinator, but it's a really important one. So that's just showing you, how important bees are to pollinating the foods that we like to eat. And because they are the ones that are deliberately collecting pollen, that's why bees are considered the most important pollinators out of all those others, the butterflies and the wasps. They will consume nectar just for energy, and also certain species like bumblebees and honeybees, of course, collect nectar to make honey. So great, that's great. You've seen lots of different pollinators, but maybe you're thinking, I don't really like bees though. I'd just rather not really have any bees in my garden. Can I just have a pollinator garden that just has butterflies in it? And I'm telling you, people have actually asked me this. They know that I teach about this, and they'll call me up and they'll say, Debbie, I really love the pollinator gardens, but I don't want any bees. I just want to have butterflies. So I say, well, bees you can't really put a no bees allowed sign up there. They don't really read. And, I'm assuming you like to eat, so you do need those bees. So, there's some education involved. You can't just plant a plant and only attract a certain kind of insect. So, nor should you want to do that. But, I understand that people have a fear of being stung. They might be, remembering a time when they were younger and got chased down by yellow jackets. We've probably all been there, so I get that. But the thing is, most bees are incapable of stinging, or they're not going to because they're away from their nest. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So in North Carolina, the vast majority of our bees are native here. Some of you may not realize this, but honeybees are not native to North Carolina. They are native to Europe and Asia. So we've introduced them here, and they have, naturalized. There are some feral or wild colonies of honeybees, not nearly as many as there used to be due to the challenges that honeybees have. But in North Carolina, we have over 500 species of bees that are native to our state. So that's pretty mind-boggling, 528 to be exact. And most of these bees, so they have different different groups or organizational strategies. So the vast majority of those are solitary bees. So solitary bees are basically single moms out there raising their kids on their own, versus a social bee, which is like a honeybee or a bumblebee, and they work together to, worker bees and work with the queen, and they all work together to raise the young, right? So, but just keep in mind that the vast majority of our 528 species are solitary. And see, the thing is, solitary bees are not aggressive. Most of them cannot sting, nor would they even need to sting because they're not defending a nest, right? So bees get defensive when they have a bunch of brood, when there's a bunch of adults present at the same location in a nest, protecting a lot of brood or larvae, right? It makes sense. So if you were out mowing your lawn and you ran over an underground yellow jacket nest, you're darn right they're going to come out swarming and try to get you because there's many adults present and they have alarm pheromones and they're going to get you. So that's not a worry or concern with solitary bees because there's a single mom, like I said. And most of the solitary bees nest in the ground. I get lots and lots of calls from people, wanting to pour gasoline down the holes of solitary bee nests because they're very concerned about seeing hundreds of bees hovering over the lawn. They don't realize that they're solitary bees. And the ones that are not ground nesters tend to be cavity nesters. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the diversity of our native bees just to give you an overview of the different types of bees, a little snapshot of some of the 528 species. There's a bumblebee nest. Bumblebees and many native bees are very opportunistic nesters. This was actually at a friend's house. It was a cat bed inside a barn, and the bumblebees had collected animal hair and dried grass and made a nest. The nest are annual colonies. So in the fall, they die out. Everybody dies, except the newly mated queen who will hibernate through the winter. Just again, I'm trying to get you to appreciate here the diversity and the beauty of our native bees. Here's one of the leafcutter bees. And then if you ever go out to your garden and it looks like someone took a hole punch to your shrubs, that is the work of the leafcutter bee because they'll cut little sections of leaf, they'll roll it up like a cigar, carry it back to the nest, and line the cavity with it. Again, very opportunistic. Here's one where I went to a friend, beekeeper, and they had made a nest inside this little section of hose. So that's it right there. So it's pretty cool, and I'm running out of time, so I see your sign back there. So I'm going to keep going. But mining bees, so this is an example of a bee that likes very shallow flowers, and look at that pollen all over her body. She's not carrying it just on the underside of her abdomen. She's got it on her eyeballs, her antennae, all over her body, and it's all going to be taken back to the nest. And speaking of the nest, here's one more example of a mining bee. In the spring. So this is what the nesting site looks like for ground nesting bees. Nothing to fear. This was at the Chapel Hill Library because they called me on it. They were freaking out because their customers were like, oh my gosh, this is right next to the parking lot. So these are all individual nests. The females in the spring, they excavate tunnels underground. They go out and collect pollen. They roll it into a ball, stuff it at the bottom of the tunnel, and lay an egg on it. And I can be over them with my camera for hours watching them. They do not sting me. They can't sting me. They don't pay me any attention. So if you have this at your site, you do not need to fear it. It's an educational, teachable moment for your kids. And it's really fun to watch the females going in and out. So this is in March 10th. 1 month later, that's what it looks like. All the females have been collecting pollen for a month. They're done, and they die. And everything's happening underground. So the larvae are developing underground throughout the whole summer, and then they'll pupate through the winter, emerge in the spring, and start over again. And you'll often see re-nesting done. Just again, hibiscus bee, I'm going to speed it up a little. These are also specialist bees on species related to hibiscus, different body shapes. This female uses that pointed abdomen to break through a leafcutter bee nest and inject the eggs and replace them with her own, like a cuckoo bird. Bumblebee, look at the tongue on that bumblebee, enables her to go, some very deep flowers. You got the all black bees with, long antennae or long horns. There's that sunflower bee again. Metallic colors, beautiful metallic and striped colors. Carpenter bees, they love the pot. They love this is their favorite flower, the passion flower, and they're perfectly designed because as they're getting nectar, they're the perfect size that their thorax scrapes under the anther and they get pollen on them. That's why they're such an important pollinator for this flower. Honeybees also are the other main visitor to this flower, but they're too small to get that pollen on their back. This is an all-black bee, very unusual, another leafcutter bee species. There's many different species. This one is all green, just beautiful iridescent, like a little flying emerald. So just some examples of more examples of ground nesting bees. It's a little later in the year. This is in May. And again, I get a call from a homeowner, very concerned. These are called chimney bees because they make these little turrets outside the holes. Again, they're not going to hurt anybody. Once the gentleman understood the role of these bees, they were not a threat to his kids. He was fine. He leaves them, and they enjoy watching them. The males will hover over the holes waiting to mate with the females. So let's talk about wasp, shall we? I hope to maybe change your mind a little bit about wasp. They get a really bad rap. We have over 2,000. There's two main categories of wasps. We've got predatory wasp and parasitic wasps. So there's over 2,000 species of predatory wasps. So these are wasps that go out and find insects and grab them and take them back to the nest. And guess what? Wasps do not eat insects. The adults don't eat insects. They're collecting all of these insects to feed to their young. So they'll actually sting the insect and paralyze it. They want it to be alive. They'll go stuff it into their nest. Their nest could be a little clay pot that they make. If it's a mason wasp, it could be an underground burrow. Just different species do different things. They paralyze it, they lay an egg on it, and that's basically providing food for their larvae. So they collect all different types of insects. They're helping control our pest. Again, it's a solitary wasp. They are not a threat to you. These are not wasps that are going to come out and get you. And then the ones that are going to come out that can be threatening or aggressive, really the word is defensive, are the social wasps. And we only have about 20 species in the U.S. Those are the paper wasp and the yellow jackets and things like that. So those are the ones that if you get near their nest, they can get very defensive. And the difference is they don't grab an insect and lay an egg on it. They actually grab the insect, tear it into pieces, and chew it and feed it to the larvae. Pretty cool, huh? Kind of like a mama bird would do, and I'm running out of time. But so those are the ones to be concerned about if you have a nest, near your child care center or whatever. So some of the solitary wasps, you don't need to worry about being stung. The thread-waisted wasp, the great back wasp, they get grasshoppers and katydids, caterpillars in this case. Stink bugs, which are pests. Stink bugs again, this is a ground nesting one. This one goes underground and preys on beetle grubs, which are actually eating your lawn. So, it's a beneficial insect. Here's a paper wasp, so now we're moving into the social wasp that actually will grab a caterpillar. Here's a paper wasp actually eating a monarch not eating, again, he's chewing it into pieces, going to bring it back to the nest. And they actually took this picture of a monarch that had been chewed upon, and I think I disturbed it and it flew away before it could carry it back to the nest. Don't worry, they're not a major threat to monarch caterpillars, just a few meet their demise this way. So then we have the parasitic wasps. So remember I said about 2,000 species of predatory. We have 7,000 of parasitic. Most of these are very, very tiny. You will hardly ever see them, and some of the species will target the egg of the host insect, some the larva, some the pupa, some the adult. Here's an example of a very tiny, that is actually a caterpillar, people, so that tells you how tiny it is. So it's actually laying it. So this is one that y'all have probably seen in your garden and you didn't realize it because that's what you see. You see the tomato hornworm. Those are not eggs on the outside of the caterpillar. Those are the cocoons of the wasp. So the wasp adult lays its egg inside the caterpillar. All the caterpillars hatch. They eat the caterpillar from the inside. It stays alive, by the way. They poke back through the skin and spin a cocoon. Isn't nature amazing? They spin cocoons. These are all cocoons of the wasp. The caterpillar is still alive. And I do whole talks on just these. I'm almost done. Of all the other cool things that are happening here. But if you see a caterpillar like that, you want to leave it because you want those wasps to emerge from those cocoons and go out and help with other pest control. Here's another parasitic wasp that we have naturally here, and also growers that I work with will actually purchase and release. This is a little tiny wasp called Ophidius that targets aphids. So it lays its eggs in aphids, but only one in each aphid. It eats it from the inside out, and then when it's done, it cuts this little trap door and exits. It's cool stuff happening out there, I'm telling y'all. This is a picture I took. I actually was able to get the picture of the aphid as it was depositing an egg, the wasp, in the aphid. The brown aphids are called aphid mummies, and they have already been parasitized, and they're bloated. So that's pretty cool stuff. That's on tomato. And this was in a greenhouse that I work with. Those are all parasitized aphids there. Parasitized aphids, and there's the wasp that has already just emerged from the aphid. This is mind-boggling. I only got one picture ever. I've only seen this wasp once. So remember that hornworm we saw with all the wasp, cocoons? This is the egg of that caterpillar, the hornworm egg. They lay one individual egg on each leaf. And this little tiny wasp, that little orange speck, is an egg parasitoid. So it lays its egg in the hornworm egg. I know, it's just so tiny. That's why I've only ever seen it once and kind of got not even a great picture, but at least you can see an orange blob. And when those are parasitized, they turn black. So you'll likely never see the egg, but you'll see the black egg. I mean the wasp, but you'll see the black egg. I just kind of wanted to show you what's happening out there and kind of the role of wasp and bees. So as we've already talked about, when you see bees and wasp in the garden, I'll tell you, I will be honest with you, the only times I've ever been stung, and you have to realize this is my garden, I'm out there all the time, and I'm out there for 10 years. In 10 years, the only time I've been stung is once when I brushed by a plant in my ankle and a honeybee stung me because I literally pushed it, right? And then another time a bumblebee flew up my shirt. So, if you have gardens like this, just keep the plants, pulled back from the garden edges where people can't brush by them accidentally. They're not going to be, they're not going to try to get you. So things that you can do, plant a pollinator garden. Like I said, I do whole other talks on that. We're not going to talk about it today. The handout I'm sending you home with is my top 25 native pollinator plants. And then I've got lots and lots of information on my website, including, tours and things like that of the garden. And you're welcome to come visit the garden anytime. Like I said, I'm doing two tours in October, and one is next Wednesday at 5 o'clock, and the other one is October 20th at 2 o'clock. And I believe I'm done. Whew, that was fast.